Today on the Whatsoever Thing show, Thomas's wife tries to kill him. And special guest Marsha Strickland, our very own pastor's wife, shares her story, talks about an unchanging God in changing times, and why she believes in aliens. It's another great show, so hang on. Here we go. Well, hey there, everyone. Welcome to the Whatsoever Thing show, a podcast designed to stimulate your mind, tickle your funny bone, and encourage your faith.
Finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think about these things.
This is episode 6 of the Whatsoever Thing show, recorded on March 1st, 2021. The Big Oak Tree.
Welcome to the Whatsoever Things podcast. I'm your host, Mike Rumer, and I want to thank you on behalf of my brothers sitting across the table. That would be Thomas, Josh, and our producer, Pastor Daniel, for listening to this church-oriented podcast. Today we have a special guest. We have Miss Marsha Strickland with us. Miss Marsha, thank you so much for being a guest on this podcast, and welcome.
Well, thank you, Mike. I'm glad to be here.
We generally start off with a sort of a little icebreaker. We talk about our week or something interesting which happened to us, and I think Thomas has something.
Yeah, something that happened on my way here that I thought it'd be interesting to get a wife's perspective, because I think my wife tried to kill me. I know things got real serious about 30 minutes ago. And,
wait, are you allowed to tell this story?
Listen, sometimes the man's got to run his own house. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, man.
And disclaimer, Miss Marsha, we try not to say people's names on this podcast.
Okay.
Unless we have their permission. If not, Pastor Daniel.
So as long as you don't say your wife's name.
Yes.
Aaron Hickman?
No, yeah, you can't say that. We'll have to bleep that out.
Yeah, so she is an amazing wife who I get off at 5 o'clock, and I've got to drive 15 minutes home, shower real quick, because I've been working outside all day. Y'all do not want me sitting in here without a shower, I promise. So she makes my dinner and has it ready for me to, I just grab it and I go. She usually has my drink poured, my dinner ready. I just got to grab my stuff and go. Well, today she knows I don't like mustard. And so I made a short joke when I got home, because she's very short.
I think they call it height challenge. We don't want to offend people.
Somebody, my wife, put a big old glob of mustard in the middle of my chicken sandwich as I'm driving down the road.
No,
so, of course, I'm thinking my life's over. That's it. I'm watching things flash before my eyes.
Yeah.
And would you do that to your husband, Miss Marsha?
No. But not for that, for a different reason. He has a very weak stomach, and I would have had to clean up the car later.
I don't.
No, if I put something in his sandwich that I know he didn't like mayonnaise,
Thomas.
it would be a terrible, terrible,
that's not
terrible
bad.
situation.
Oh, no. I'm telling you, my life flashed.
How long have y'all been married now?
It'd be 6 years on Sunday.
And this woman fixes your supper and fixes your drink, and she
put
just
a little dab right in the middle, so you wouldn't see it.
No. I called her.
Though.
She said she tried for a little dab, but it came out way more than a little dab. Because I'm halfway through the sandwich, and I'm like, man, this is such a good sandwich. And then the next bite, I was like, what?
See,
that's
not bad though, because in our household, I lock up the rat poison and things just so she doesn't get tempted. I'm not saying she would.
I'm sure she's tempted. I'm sure she's tempted.
She doesn't know where the key is.
That wasn't really a bad thing, though. I mean, she could have done a lot worse, right?
I feel like it was.
Thomas,
I feel like it was
I have
terrible.
got to ask you this. Would you have any gray poupon?
I don't have it on my sandwich, that's for sure.
Thomas, you really got to hand it to short people.
It's because they can't reach it?
That's why.
Oh, man.
Oh, dear.
Really
We just lost half our listeners, the short ones.
Back to the reason we're here, and this is to talk and pick the brain of Miss Marsha Strickland. So, Miss Marsha, what we will do when we interview people, we know you're going to listen to our first podcast, but we asked each other this question: how did you end up at Oxford Assembly of God? And that can go from a discussion on how you physically got here at Oxford Assembly of God to how you got saved, your story, but however you want to elaborate. So,
okay, Mike, let me tell you something that most people might not know about Oxford when we first came here, we were at the little parsonage down the road, about 2 blocks south of here. And there was a big, big oak tree right outside the kitchen window. I mean, it was a humongous oak tree with a flower bed around it. And when we came driving down 301 back then, which was
dirt road, right?
85?
Well, no, it wasn't a dirt road, Josh, but it was a 2-lane. And there were trees, big oak trees, lining both sides of the road. It was the most beautiful place I thought I'd ever been. And when we walked into the parsonage and I looked out the kitchen window, I said, this is my place. This is the place God made for me. And we pastored 9 years in Lake Wales. Then we'd gone 3 years in Alabama. We lived in parsonages all those times. But when I got to Oxford and saw those oak trees, especially the one right outside my kitchen window, I just knew that was my confirmation. Now, my husband, that was, he's with his talk and walk with the Lord is different, but I want a sign that means something to me, speaks to me emotionally, not spiritually, not anything like that, but just an emotional moment that God gave me, and it was like that big oak tree, and I loved it. And we lived there 6 years before we built our house out where we live now, which is just a block behind the church. But that was the moment that I knew that this was the place God had made for me. And we've been here, this month will be 36 years.
Oh, wow.
And I still am amazed. We drove down to over in the villages today to Lake Sumter Landing. We took a missionary couple over there. We were talking about the villages. But the thing that impressed me just driving along were the big oak trees over there.
Yeah.
It's still gorgeous.
Yes.
It's the most beautiful place. And I'd like to talk a little bit about, we have an unchanging God, but we live in a changing world. And the changes that happened in the 36 years since we came here have been incredible. When we first came here, we had to go either to Leesburg or to Ocala to shop. There was just nowhere else to go. The first time I said, I want to go to a mall. Well, they said, okay, well, you have to go to Leesburg. So we went to Leesburg. There was no mall. It was 25 miles. The mall was way over almost to Eustis. And I thought, oh my goodness, 25 miles, that's a long way. So then we came back home and I said, okay, is there a closer mall? Well, there's one in Ocala. That's the only place to shop, So we drove. And it has changed so much. The little it wasn't dirt road, but 2-lane road between Oxford and 27. You could drive that 466. Yeah. There was a blinker light at the corner of 301 and 466. Sister Hatcher had a grocery store down at the corner. My kids would walk down to the corner to Sister Hatcher's grocery store. It was perfectly safe. There was no traffic. Perfectly safe. And there were about 4 or 5 houses between here and all the way to 27. And it was gorgeous pasture land, and there were cattle. There were cantaloupe fields and watermelon fields and tomato fields. That's what Oxford was a farming community.
You said there were 4 or 5 houses between here and 27?
Mm-hmm. All the way.
Oh,
I could probably point out and name to you the houses that were there.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And then they started building. And I would go down 466, and there would be big dirt movers and earth movers and bulldozers and everything. And the next week, there'd be a whole village there. It was such a fast change and such a transition. That was a big change. And my husband always said he wouldn't like to minister in a big city. So God just brought the people to us. It became a big populous area. To us, it is a populous area. So that was a big change. The other example I was thinking about, when I was a little girl, I was maybe my early teens, possibly. And my dad, we always went for a Sunday afternoon drive. And one day he says, let's get in the car and we're going to drive out from Haines City. We lived in Winter Haven area. He said, I'm going to drive out toward Haines City. I'm going to show you something. We went for a drive, about an hour, out into the woods. There was nothing but scrub oaks, palmetto, those cabbage palmettos. It was just woods, dirt roads, little dirt lanes. He said, I've heard that there's going to be something like Disneyland, but they're going to build it here.
No way.
And yeah, and this year is 50-year anniversary of Disney World. So that was when it very first, the idea, they started buying up the land there. And it was nothing.
Should have bought some, Miss Marsha.
I know. It's terrible. But then that change was enormous for that area. And the other thing that really God brought to my mind talking about change, when we went to Israel, we went on a tour of a museum. It was a Holocaust museum that the Israeli people have made to memorialize the lives that were lost and the Jews that were lost in the Holocaust. And it's a big place. And so when we went on a tour of Israel, we went there and we were on the bus getting ready to leave the facility. And there were 3 students in the parking lot, sort of with backpacks on. And our tour guide started talking to them. It turned out they were students from Germany. And they had come to Israel specifically to see that museum. And we got to talking to them, and they said that they are required from the 3rd grade up to learn about the Holocaust because the German people don't ever want to forget what happened and what actually they did and history, because there are some people now that say, oh, it didn't ever really happen. Well, that museum has artifacts, and it was a horrible place. It was a horrible time. But those people want to remember. And the Bible says in Ecclesiastes that there's nothing new under the sun. Mm-hmm. Now, that doesn't mean that there are no new inventions or developments. Of course, we can write now what we're doing. A few years ago, nobody would ever think about it. But what it does mean in general, that there's no new types of ambitions or desires of people. People have always had the same desires and ambition from the very beginning of time. There's always been sin from the very beginning in the Garden of Eden. There's always been slavery. There's always been wars. There's always been people fighting against each other. Those things never change. There's nothing new in that. There might be new developments, technology and the Industrial Revolution, all that is new, but the desires of people never change. Never change. And so I was thinking that one of the most important things that we need to do is the Bible says to teach our children. In Deuteronomy 4:9, I've got a scripture that says, only be careful and watch yourselves closely so that you do not forget the things your eyes have seen or let them slip from your hearts as long as you live. And the Bible also talks about teaching your children things, to always walk and teach them. Sometimes I feel very much of a failure of teaching my own children to walk the things that I look back and say, oh, I could have done this different, or I could have taught them this a different way. Because I don't think you ever can talk enough to your children about the Lord. And I don't know how you guys, I know you.
I think they had a pretty good couple of parents. And they're all right.
Well,
you want to see Big Old Casey melt. You have them talking about moms.
Yeah.
Moms, but yeah. And and I have I was watching a preacher, or he works at a Bible college in Africa named Vodi Bachman. I've been watching some YouTube stuff on him, and he's very, I don't know, Pastor Daniel, is he Calvinistic or is he very? But he's really, he says if the church is doing the biblical stuff, if people are doing church biblically and raising your family biblically, you're doing exactly what you said. You're teaching and rearing them up at home in the ways they should walk. And
it says when they're old, they won't depart from it.
Yes. Yes. So, and I look at that. I've got children in high school and middle school, and it goes by fast.
It does.
You think you're talking about what happened at church and Sunday school and different concerts coming up, or you sing Christian songs with them, but you really you think, am I really covering all the bases? And that's been kind of.
And it's more. I think it's more than just giving them knowledge too. I think was it Dwight or not Moody? I think said if you get a guy who's stealing railroad spikes or ties from a railroad and you educate him, like you said, people don't change too much. He'll learn how to steal an entire railroad company, And so,
right.
But there's something that the heart changes in Christian walk, and like if you see your parents walking the Christian walk and you teach them, the heart changes, and then like nothing's new under the sun, but there's something for eternity that's passed under the sun.
Something going along the lines of the true, something I'd heard on a podcast a little while back was, if it's true, it's not new. And if it's new, it's not true. And it just kind of, you know what I mean? It's speaking spiritually, biblically, whatever, the desires of heart of man, whoever, that's 100% fact. Like you were saying, that we've always desired for more, and the thing we desire for may be changing necessarily, but the desire is still the same.
And I hold to, with my work with the Royal Rangers, I read a book by S. Truett Cathy, who started Chick-fil-A. And the Chick-fil-A as a company has a very big, they're into working with adoption and group homes for kids. And S. Truett Cathy had a quote in his book that said actually the book title was, "It's better to build boys than to mend men, or it's easier to build boys than to mend men." And that is so true, and I keep that in the back of my mind as I go through with dealing with my family and working with the Royal Rangers.
It's not easy sometimes.
So just thinking about that Holocaust Museum and how that was hammered into these kids about this happened and this could happen again, and you need to be aware of these things. And it kind of reminds me also of the Old Testament where Moses wrote down the Hebrew Shema, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, Lord is one." He says, teach this to your kids every day. So every day they had to recite this over and over and over again. Do you think, as a culture and as a church in the United States, the Church of the United States, we're dropping the ball a little? I mean, I know the easy answer is yes, but what's going on? Do you think?
Well, I know that God is unchanging. His character does not change. And the Bible in John 4, says, Jesus said, God is a spirit, and you have to worship God in spirit and in truth. Sometimes I think that God is he's looking down and saying, I've blessed you so much. What have you done with my blessings? Have you used what I have given you as a Christian nation? Is that why we're being considered a post-Christian nation now? We didn't use what God gave us. Our position is so unique in history. There's no other country, there's no other place that has been given what we've been given. And how have we failed to use what God has given us, the blessings He's given us, to reach the nations? Because God is not, He is a spirit, and all the things that we use, like what we're using tonight, and the live streams and the YouTubes and everything, all the ways that we have to get the word out, what are we really, really doing to sacrifice? And I'm big on saying that we don't sacrifice nearly enough. Because if what you give doesn't hurt you, you're not giving enough.
I don't like that saying.
Yeah, I know, but it's the truth.
Thank you for being here, and good night.
You're gonna cut me off right there. I know, but truly, if what you give is not, it can't be a sacrifice. That's what the word sacrifice means. It's giving up something. And what have we given up as personal Christians in our personal walk? What have we given up as Americans? I know we've fought. Our military, of course, have fought in wars, and we have in World War I and World War II. I don't know what Europe would be like if America had not sacrificed the way it did to help win those wars against, I believe, men of evil. But have we given personally? Has the church given personally? Are we still asking God to give us? He gave us his son. He gave us the ultimate.
Yeah.
And he made the ultimate sacrifice. But have we actually given to missions? Have we gone? Have we done? I know my husband says I'm always working, I'm always doing. But when I get home at night, I'm thinking, okay, could I have done more? Could we have raised a few more dollars for missions? Could we have, what could we have done?
I promise you Josh does not think that when he gets home from work.
But, you know, I know God loves us and we can just rest in Jesus and his grace is sufficient.
Now we're talking my language.
Now his grace is sufficient. It's not by works that we're saved. But I'm just wondering if we realize how much God loves us. If somebody loves you a whole lot, you want to do something for them. And it's like, you know, Thomas, Aaron's making your supper. That shows to me that this woman loves you so much that it takes time and effort to make supper and that kind of thing. So that's the way she's showing her love. Well, how do we show our love to God? Yeah. How do we show our love to God, you know?
Yes, Josh, please answer that.
Well, there's a 3-step process. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, yes, you think about, is God an appointment on your calendar? You know, the church, I'd say this is not a sacrifice of our church, but I think you could maybe look at it as a sacrifice of time and brain power. But this church, Oxford Assembly of God, in order to make your individual worship and walk with God and the appointment on your calendar, we have a paved parking lot, we have air conditioning, we've expanded, we have nice floors, we have nice pews, we do a video that says we're starting, we make it so comfortable, so easy and stress-free to spend some time with the Lord here. But are we sacrificing on other things and other ways that we could be putting that emphasis?
You know, it's funny when you see a new Christian too. They're like, they want to light the world on fire, and then guys like me, like, whoa, I appreciate your enthusiasm, bud, but this is a long haul we're on. You know,
we gotta walk before we run around here.
They're right though. I mean, they're ready to sacrifice. They're ready to do stuff, and our group is called On the Move, you know, the Sunday school group, and it's because everybody's busy. Everybody's got baseball or something going on, and it's like once a month we're gonna get together, we're gonna do something, and it's so
hard to meet. Even get that once a month.
Even in the older days, I feel like, I mean, I'm only 35. Is that what we figured out, Thomas? 35, and I can remember a slower time, and it seems like things are really fast happening all the time.
I know. When I was little, we used to live across the street from the church that I attended. It was a Baptist church, and my dad was Baptist, and so was my mom, the kind that's once saved, always saved. And but I went to church. I went to church from the time I was tiny, and I would come. The ladies would come to our house. The church ladies would come, and my mom was a big quilter. She would set the quilting frames around in our living room, and I would play underneath. They would have what they call quilting bees. I don't know where ladies found time to do that. They didn't work for the majority. My mom did. But for the majority, the ladies didn't work back when I was small. And they would sit around and quilt quilts for the missionaries, and I would play underneath the frame. And that's the way I grew up. Even people who weren't, well, like my parents, weren't what I would call spiritual at all, they still understood that missionaries were important, and they worked to give them. Now, my dad was the kind, well, if those people over there was meant to be saved, they'd, be saved, and God would appear to them or something. But for the most part, my whole family were Christians, and they knew that it was important to get the word out.
Pastor Daniel, you look like you've heard that a number of times.
The quilting bee.
If they were meant to be saved.
Oh, if they were meant to be saved,
God let them know somehow. I remember you saying one time, when you get to heaven, you would just want to be bored for 100 years just to see what that's like. That's true. That doesn't sound bad, actually.
That's true. Well, we started in the ministry when my husband and I was 18 and he was 19 when we got married. We worked in our local church. I worked in the nursery. Lord help me.
Yeah.
From the time I was 14 years old, that was what I did, and it was working with children, doing children's crusades, doing all that when we were young teenagers. And then when we got into the ministry, I was different in that I couldn't play the piano, which pastors' wives back then were supposed to be able to play the piano. I couldn't do it, so I felt
that was the second question on the interview. How well was she at the piano?
I felt so insignificant and unprepared because I was a kid. I was when we took the first church, I was probably not even 20 yet.
Wow.
And here I was, a pastor's wife, and people would come to me with these strange problems and questions that I had no idea.
Wow.
I had no experience at.
That's a big undertaking.
So I
would
go buy these books that said, "What's the pastor's wife?
How to be a pastor's wife.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
You couldn't Google it, so
that's right.
Something though that interesting is like whenever someone hires a pastor, a church hires a pastor, they expect the pastor's wife for free. And they want her to pull a lot of weight, and they want her to get everything done. And I've never heard you complain. I don't think you have to do all the stuff you do, but you do it all, and I've never heard you complain.
If you look at a sign-up list for food, for whatever, the chili night,
you
see her name's one of the first ones on every list.
Well, to me, that's my ministry. I'm not a preacher.
She didn't sign up
you
for
do.
Youth Lock-In.
No, that I will not
But
sign
you're
up for
just-
Youth Lock-In either, ever.
You're just a volunteer like any of us, but
Right.
you volunteer more than I would say anybody.
Well, I'm grateful to God that He's given me that platform because I don't feel adequate to preach, and I can teach, but I don't think that was my major calling. But He's given me a platform to do what I can do.
So you are blessed like me. My spiritual gift is helps.
Right.
And that's really a lot of fun to have.
There is a true spiritual gift of help and hospitality.
Yeah.
Now, my mom, who, like I said, was not a spiritual giant at all, but she knew how to be hospitable. When we were teenagers in our little home church, it didn't matter. We lived about 10 miles from Southeastern University. It was Southeastern College back then, Southeastern Bible College. And we would have kids, well, I call them kids, they were students who would come to our church, our little church, to help out. Every Sunday, my mom would not go to church, but she stayed home and she cooked elaborate meals. And she encouraged us to invite anybody we wanted to. Sometimes there were 6 teenagers around our table who we, just bring them home from church.
That takes a lot of food.
And they didn't get food at Southeastern back then like they do now. I mean, now they've got these wonderful cafes and restaurants. Well, back then, one time, we even rioted and did a sit-in about the food at Southeastern. It was so bad.
I think that we need to dive into this.
It was like a sit-in kind of thing, It was awful.
We won't take it.
This is a groundbreaking podcast. We can break that there was a riot at Southeastern. What year was this?
Well, the students hated the food, and so they wouldn't eat all week, and they'd save up for the weekend, They'd come to my mama's house, and my daddy, who was also not a spiritual giant, he said, "Now, Peggy, don't you feed those boys chicken. They're going to eat fried chicken the rest of their lives. Preachers eat fried chicken." You feed them good food, so she'd make roast and beef roast and big, pork hams and all kind of good stuff for them, but no fried chicken because Daddy was adamant.
That's funny.
But anyway, I've had some interesting growing up kind of things like that. Although my parents weren't Christians, they knew how to be Christians.
When I started coming to church here, it was in '93, and I was in 3rd grade. And I remember this was the first church I came to where there was like church for children. There was a children's church, and Miss Marsha was the children's teacher. And I remember we had coloring contests and the treasure box. But yeah, you did it all.
It's changed a lot since once Ted Davis and I did children's church together, and our favorite song, Ted loved the song "I Love Jesus Better Than Ice Cream," and ice cream's very good.
That's pretty funny.
That's true.
I like that.
It was one of our favorite songs back then in our little children's church.
Yeah, I didn't know Ted Davis did that. He was my Sunday school teacher. When I was younger, but I never knew he was part of the.
He was in charge of youth for a while too.
Yeah.
There's some stories behind that. We need to get Ted here to tell some of those stories.
Yes, you do.
Because you weren't allowed to fight on church campus, but if you walked across the street, Ted wouldn't notice. He said he wouldn't notice. And so every fight happened right across the street over there.
How many fights did you get in across the street, Josh?
I didn't, but
I may have gotten in a fight.
I'm not
gonna
we're not allowed to mention names, but there were some Strickland boys who kind of sometimes.
Yeah. I am not surprised at that. But these kind of things, these stories, that's the kind of things that we need to tell. You need to tell your children and younger people, because that's the history of the church. There's a rich history, a rich spiritual history at Oxford Assembly of God. It was started by a lady preacher, and many Assemblies of Gods were started. There was women were prominent in the church when the church began, when the Assemblies of God began. It was a strong movement with women, and the first person here was a woman. Not for long, but for a while. Was
amazing.
Lady pastor.
What just the stories that. Like you said, you had lunch with the missionary. Man, the amount of missionaries
you took the lunch
you have had lunch with and had over your house, and you've heard their stories, and they've the way they've had to sacrifice. And anything stand out?
We have had we've had dozens, I might say 100 missionary families around our table through the years. We have had people who they've had to, they leave their homes, they leave their families. Some of them have absolutely left their families. A lot of it's according to what place they are in the world, but some of them have to put their children in boarding schools. They're not allowed. The children aren't with them. They're put in boarding schools. And always, through the years, I've always thought about those children, what a sacrifice it was for the parents to leave their children in a government boarding house or in a Assembly of God boarding house, whatever, to go hundreds of miles, maybe in Africa, into the bush country or into wild areas that the children would not be safe. And so they had to leave them. And those kind of things, always glad When I was a little girl, I wanted to be a missionary. I wanted to be a Chinese missionary, not go to China, but be actually Chinese.
Are you good with chopsticks? Or?
Well, we had one come to our church, and I thought it was just the most wonderful thing. When I was little, like 5 years old, I wanted to be a Chinese missionary.
Oh, that's funny.
But when I think about the sacrifices through the years that missionaries have made, even from the beginning, New Testament times, most of the people in New Testament Christians were put to death. And what a sacrifice. And how fortunate and how precious the gospel is. Mm-hmm. And how fortunate we are to hear it. I mean, I was thinking today there were some people, a missionary, one was from North Dakota, and one was from Minneapolis, I think it was. I was thinking, we live in the Bible Belt. All I knew all my life, my grandmother, my mother, my great-grandmother, we're all Bible-believing people in the South. How blessed I am, because I could have been born in New York. I could have been born into a Jewish family or a Hindu family or a Buddhist family. And those people deserve to know the gospel just as much as I did. But what a wonderful gift that we were given to know Christ, to have the opportunity from the time we were little and young.
And like it says, to whom much is given, much is required.
We were in Sunday school. We started the book of Exodus, and Josh did such a good job of preparing for that. And just looking at the map, you look and it's like God could have led Moses to the promised land
in a matter of months,
cutting across the sea.
Right.
But in that they had to sacrifice. He had to refine them and teach them.
Get rid of the bad ones.
Yes, there was a lot. If you think about Paul's journey to Rome, how many chapters does it take to go by boat? We've had the storm, but I think God, had led Moses, met him on a mountain and really refined them and to teach him the laws and the way to, made the trip longer, obviously, than it needed to be. And that was the first, form of sacrifice. Great sacrifice in the Old Testament.
I think we're all supposed to be some kind of missionaries where we are. And nowadays, I mean, there's plenty of mission field out there. This ain't the Bible Belt.
Right.
No, it's not the Bible. I don't think it's been the Bible Belt in a long time.
It's changing, but if you go to some other parts of the country, of our United States, you will see we have how many churches around us? How many churches are right around this area? We went to my husband's sister, who passed away a few months ago. When she was younger, her family, her husband got a job in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And she had gone to church all her life. She was raised in church. She was a godly woman. And she tried so very hard to find a church in her neighborhood. There were no churches. There were big Catholic cathedrals on every corner. But as far as a Protestant, Bible-believing church like she was used to, there was nothing. And that's the way it is in a lot of places. But I've been thinking a lot today. One of the things I was thinking, we were talking about to the missionary couple about how many churches were actually right around here available for people in the villages, and because of the growth and everything, how many bigger churches have come. When we came to Oxford, a Catholic family would have to go to Bushnell, was the closest Catholic church, or Leesburg, St. Paul's in Leesburg. Now we have 3 Catholic churches who at the Easter season run over 10,000 each.
They have services,
and they have continually having services. It is really a place where churches are really common, as opposed to other parts of the country where I know that we are not Catholic, and that's not a denomination that we are part of, but there's an ample opportunity for those people to worship at a vibrant place. And it's the same way with almost all the other denominations. There is a place for them to worship in this area. in some parts of the country, we've been on vacation many times where we would we always like to go to church on Sundays no matter what. Excuse me. We couldn't find a church. There was no church close within the driving of where we were.
Do you guys go to church when you're on vacation?
Absolutely.
That's what she just said, Josh.
You know why, Josh?
I was thinking it while she was I'm sorry, cut that out, Daniel. I don't want to look like an idiot.
Leave that in there, please.
Leave it in because it's true. Now, we go maybe for a different reason than you would think.
Oh, do some spying, huh?
We're interested in how other people worship. I mean, if you've been your own pastor for 50 years,
right? Yeah.
You don't have any experience of anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And
I bet that'd be pretty interesting being a pastor for that long, and then like, well, I don't know, are we doing it right?
Yeah.
Should we go check
how
out
do other
somebody
people
else?
do it?
What are they doing?
That's right. So that is one reason we go, and the other reason is we want to find a place to worship.
Mm-hmm.
And there's only one time that ever backfired.
Story time.
Yep.
Yeah, this
Pull
is
up a chair,
this is a story. Oh my goodness, we were in Tennessee, and we had been.
No.
We had been to this church before.
I can counter that argument.
But we had been to this church before, so we knew we had vacationed in this area before, so we knew the church, and so it was time to go, and I said I don't want to go to church today, and that just shocked my husband right out of his mind because we always go to church. He said okay, but I said okay, we'll go. When we walked in the church, you could cut the atmosphere with a knife. It was horrible. They had just asked their pastor to resign. And oh my goodness, it was a horrible situation. People were angry and bitter, and it was not a good situation. But normally, when we go into a church, we're welcomed, and that was just one instance of
because they have you fill out the card. Please fill out the card.
Right. And we and we have been to churches where we weren't greeted as friendly, a friendly, exuberant greeting. And that would be a lesson. My husband would say, we really need to step up on our greeting, step up on our fellowship. When new people come in, how did it make us feel? So,
speaking of whippings, when we had Casey in here a couple of weeks ago, I told him, and I want to know how much it costs. I said, I don't have much money, Casey, but I would give all of it to your mama for me to watch her whoop you. How much would it cost? That's what I want to know.
Listen, I got to tell you about Casey and whippings. Now, this probably might need to be edited out because it might embarrass him to death.
Oh, please, let's do it.
But
He's Mr. Olympian. He needs something to embarrass him.
He would get spankings on a regular occasion, yeah. But usually he called them his Sunday specials because he'd invariably get in trouble on Sunday for getting in trouble. He gets Sunday specials. But his daddy would start to spank him. And he'd say, "Oh, God, help me. Oh, God, help me." And then he'd say, if it was really bad, "Oh, Jesus, 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 help me." And then one day he said, "Oh, Holy Spirit, please help me." And his daddy just fell apart. He couldn't spank him. He said, when a child comes on, the Holy Spirit help him.
He was appealing to all of them.
It was hysterical.
That's hilarious.
No spanking.
Didn't he jump out of a car, a moving vehicle?
He didn't jump. Casey's life God has something for him special. He was born premature. He was 6 weeks premature, so he weighed 4 pounds. He was the ugliest. Talking about aliens. You can take that out too, Daniel, because
this is the best night of my life.
He was premature, and the doctor came into my room the day after he was born that night, just wringing his hands. I don't know what to do, because it was a small hospital, Lake Wales, and we didn't have, none of the big neonatal units were open at the big university hospitals, so he didn't know what to do. The doctor literally didn't know what to do. So the only other option was Women's Hospital in Tampa. and I'll be forever grateful, Dr. Solomon. They took him. It was a women's hospital. It was a private hospital, and we didn't have insurance. But when Casey was born, I always say we put him on the credit card. We're still paying him off. But they took him there, and he stayed in the hospital 11 days, and I sat right by his, they put a little stool by his little incubator thing, and I put my hand on him 21 hours out of 24 hours. The only time I would leave the room is during the nurse changes. 3 times they would have nurse changes during the 24 hours. I would leave the room. But I slept on a stool with my hand. The doctor says you need to bond with him. And somebody said, I think you overdid it. But
yeah, I was a mama's boy.
But he came through that, and he was never sick. We never had to take him to the doctor when he was little. He would only go to the doctor for his regular checkups. So he's never, no after effects or side effects, whatever you call it, from being born premature.
Still ugly.
Oh, he's not either.
Pastor Daniel just said that Casey is ugly.
Yeah.
But we moved to Alabama. I think that was probably the first instance. But he would walk from his daddy's office was like a block, or maybe just like next door to what they call the 7-Eleven kind of store. Only in Alabama it's called something different. I can't remember what it was, but
610,
something different, 612 or something. I don't know what it was, but anyway, he would walk over. He would leave his daddy's office, walk over, and he would go in the store. He was only we moved here when he was 4, so he was little. He would get candy because the candy was right there in front, about his height. He'd reach in and get some candy and walk back to the church. And the lady would always call, Pastor Strickland, Casey's been in again. So his dad, he would have to get a spanking and walk all the way back and put the candy back and pay for it. So he was always getting in trouble that way. But we lived about a block from the city pool. And we had just moved into the parsonage there, and it was a chain link fence around the backyard, and I thought it was safe. He couldn't get in trouble. He had his little diaper on. He was playing in the backyard, and all of a sudden, I looked up from the book I was reading, and he wasn't there. He was just a toddler. And come to find out, the people next door had a cat that had dug a hole underneath the fence, and he'd followed the cat through the little hole in the fence. And the neighbors were all called in. We were all called, I was praying. The police were there. We were trying to find this lost child. And I had gone to the church, which was across a busy highway, looking for him. I'd gone down to the city pool looking for him. And finally, this police car drove up into our yard and held Casey up in his little diaper. He said, "Feet hot, Mama, feet hot." So he had been walking down a hot road with his little bare feet.
That's the child you prayed for.
We prayed. And then one time we went I didn't have a washing machine when we lived in Alabama, so I went to the laundromat. And the laundromat had a Winn-Dixie kind of shopping area at the other end, and it had a little merry-go-round kind of thing. You put a quarter in, you went around and around. So he always wanted to play on that. So I was taking the laundry out of the dryer. Robbie was right there behind me. I turned around and Casey was gone. So I said, oh no, he's gone to ride the little merry-go-round. So I take off to the other end of the shopping center, and he was nowhere to be found. And so I went back to the laundromat and went out the back door. And right out the back door was the edge of a drop-off of the mountain. And it was covered with kudzu, which was a vine kind of thing that grows there and covers everything. Well, you couldn't see the drop-off, but if he had stepped right off the pavement, he would have dropped off the side of the mountain. Well, there was another policeman. We had a real reputation with policemen. There was another policeman with his little light going, and ma'am, I caught him right as he was fixing to step off the side of the mountain. I said, oh, my God. We had to pray a lot. And then we went to Montgomery, was the biggest city close by, and there was somebody in the hospital there. So we took the church van, And we went to the hospital. It was the first time we'd gone to the hospital to visit anybody, so we didn't know where we were going. So my husband pulled in a gas station to get directions. And, of course, the first thing the kids do are take the seatbelts off and pile out of the van. I said, do not get out of the van. Stay right where you are. Your daddy will be right back. We got in the van. We pulled out onto the 4-lane highway, and Casey goes bopping out the door. He fell out the van door and bounced on the road. And I jumped out, grabbed him. He was screaming, crying. And this car pulled up beside my husband. He said, sir, the little boy bounced his head on the asphalt.
That explains a lot.
And Daryl said, I know, we're headed to the hospital now. So we were headed to the hospital. We just knew he was not a bump, nothing. By the time we got 2 blocks down the road, he had stopped crying. So we went to a football game one time with my brother-in-law and sister-in-law after all these incidents happened, and they were watching Casey. They were taking care of Casey.
I've heard this story.
And my sister-in-law comes, she says, Marsha, I have to apologize to you. We just thought you were just a bad parent. We've lost him.
It's not your fault.
It's not your fault. We've lost Casey. We can't find him anywhere.
That's hilarious.
He's unique.
So anyway, I would always tell him, God has something very special for you because he has rescued you from he drunk. Yeah, one time he drunk cough syrup and got drunk on it.
Yeah, how old was he?
Well, he's a baby. We were still in Alabama. Well, all this stuff happened in Alabama. I had given it. They had a bad cough.
To me too.
I'd given him this prescription cough medicine because both of them had a bad cough, and I was so tired and so sleepy that I set the cough syrup up on their little toy box. And the next morning, I got up, and Casey was out in the yard, just staggering around. And I took the bottle of the cough medicine bottle out, and it was almost empty. And I said, Casey, how much did you drink? He said, only drunk a little bit. And he held his little hand, only a little bit. So we had to take him to the hospital and get his stomach pumped out.
He put it up on the table and said, I want another.
So he's had some real, it could have been bad things, and God has taken care of him. So I always tell him, yeah, something special.
I'm so happy right now.
I know. I kind of feel bad though, because we
right. He's not here to defend himself.
Yeah.
No,
he couldn't.
We need to hear stuff about Robbie.
He never got in that kind of situation.
Robbie, brother, you got to do something.
Boring
here.
life.
Thomas, you have a question for Miss Marsha?
Well, I do, but I want to start it, but I want to let Josh kind of chime in here because Josh is the reason I have the question.
Somewhere in my past, I can't remember when, but aliens came up, and you said something. I heard you say, well, if God's a creating God, why would he stop creating? I'm like, whoa. And this was a while ago when Christians ain't supposed to believe in that sort of thing.
I'll probably get in trouble, excommunicated or whatever they do.
And I told Thomas about it, like, Miss Marsha believes in aliens. He said, what?
I have thought of that. He told me that, I don't know, 7 or 8 years ago, probably. And I've never stopped thinking about it. Every time I see Miss Marsha, I'm like, I need to know.
Well, I hope I don't get in real trouble and they don't kick me out of my position.
Position as volunteer?
Yeah.
That's the best thing about volunteering. You can't get fired.
I think the term maybe is different. Aliens, I don't think I would call them aliens, but I think there's other life forms because God is a creating God and he's had eternity to create. There are billions and billions and billions. When you start reading about the vastness of the universe, why not?
Yeah.
Why do we think we're exclusive?
I
he's
agree 100%.
Out there. He's been creating forever. And because he's a creator, I just feel like he's creating and he's always created and always will.
What would you say to anybody who says, well, why doesn't the Bible say anything about, other life forms or whatever?
Would it?
Well, that's kind of my thing is we're kind of given the instructions we need. Those are things we don't.
It's sort of like none of our business.
Yeah, it really doesn't
God
matter.
is God. Yeah. Really, we can't know everything about God. We wouldn't.
Well, I think it's interesting.
Try to know everything about God.
you've got different kinds of angels, and they're intelligent life forms, even if it's a spiritual realm. Well, there's already intelligent life that isn't human. Why not physical life that's intelligent?
Well, it might be.
Are you insinuating that intelligent
I'm
life
not
is
saying there's
human?
any here.
Because I don't. I'm not 100% sure I've met many intelligent humans, myself included.
I just think that God is so awesome that we can never fathom the greatness of Him and His creative force, His intellect. Just think, I always taught my first graders, the best thing I loved to teach was a unit I taught on bees. And I studied bees and studied everything I could ever find out about them. And they're the most incredible creatures. And just the little bitty insect that's so insignificant is so marvelous. And when I think about all the creation, I love to watch the National Geographic things. Think about all the creation that God made in 6 days, and just the one day, and 2 that He really was doing the animals and the the plants and everything. He did all that. I don't know how long a day is, because with God, there's no time, there's no space. That's something we could never fathom as humans. We can't fathom no time, no space. It's just too much for us. Our brains can't fathom it. But when someone passes away from this life, I feel as that my spirit will become a spirit that has no time and no space limitations. And that's just, I believe that when in John 4, when Jesus said God is a spirit, that's what He meant. We have no limitations as a spirit. And so we just can't understand all that. Our minds are just not capable of it. And the other thing that I've been studying since my eye, I've had some eye surgeries and eye situations. I've been studying the eye. And there is a book written by Dr. James Pitt about the eye. He's an incredible physician, but he's also an incredible Christian. He studied the eye. He's the one that came up with a lot of the laser surgery for cataracts and that kind of thing. He runs St. Luke's Eye, and incredible man. But he's got a whole book, and it's really thick, about the eye and how it refutes evolution. Just the structure of your eye. And it's also incredible. And I'm thinking, we just can't fathom God, and I don't think we were meant to ever be able to. But I wouldn't call them aliens, but I think there's got to be.
Well, I agree with you 100%, because I always, back when Josh told me that was something that it wasn't among Christians, wasn't like a topic, and so Josh was like, "Well, Miss Marsha kind of believes in aliens," and I was like, "Yes, I got somebody on my side."
The real question, Miss Marsha, what's the government hiding? What
are they not hiding?
We're talking about real intelligence here. We're not talking about the government, Josh. We're talking about that.
What's the last word, Miss Marsha?
Some things are only one generation away from totally disappearing. Some spiritual things. The church is only one generation from extinction. The generation that we have in our hands. You can't go back to the past and what's going to be the future. It's in our hands. It's in your hands. My generation's quickly passing. The future of the church is in your hands in this generation. All the change doesn't make any difference. There's an unchanging God whose character never changes. But He's given us the gift of building His church. And He said He would build His church, but we're the instruments.
Amen. So let it be.
No pressure.
All right, y'all, we just want to thank you for listening to our podcast today. The Whatsoever Things podcast is just a group of folks sitting around talking about their faith, and it does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of the leadership of Oxford Assembly of God. Don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. You can subscribe in whatever your favorite podcast application is. And if you'd like to find out more information about our church, you can visit our website at www.oxfordag.org. That's oxfordag.org. We'll see you next time.